Quickly before we start, this is an English reading and commentary of The Traitor by investigative journalist Anabel Hernández. The book has never received an official English release, so what you're hearing is a translation, paraphrase, and analysis meant to keep the meaning and context of the original book. This series is for educational, historical context, and discussion only. Nothing here is meant to glorify any criminal activity. Let's get it. So in classic El Cartel style, we're going back to where we started. Series reactions like Surviving El Chapo and Cartel Wives. This time it's The Traitor, written by Anabel Hernández. It's based on her direct access to the secret diary and testimony of Vicente Zambada Niebla, aka El Vicentillo, son of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, one of the founding leaders of the Sinaloa cartel. This book should reveal how Vicentillo cooperated with the United States government and how the Sinaloa cartel works from the inside out. The relationships, the betrayals, and the possible connection between the Sinaloa cartel and the Mexican government. What makes this book different is that it's told from the perspective of Vicentillo himself through his diary, as well as Anabel's investigation. The Traitor, the secret diary of the son of El Mayo. Preface. The history behind the history. It was a cold and convulsive January 2011 when he looked for me. A month ago, there was published The Lords of the Narco, which shortly after going on sale was already in its third reprint. The book was causing controversy and discomfort in the government, in business circles, and in the drug cartels themselves. Even his protagonist, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, had read it, as his partner would tell me years later, sentimentally, Emma Coronel. The portrait I made of Chapo was a pretext to narrate what was behind the impunity of the members of the Sinaloa cartel, in particular, and behind the so-called President Felipe Calderon's war against narcos in general. Since the first chapter, A Poor Devil, I wanted to outline the dimensions of the boss and the myth. Although they claim to be the most powerful drug traffickers of all time, the sinister mind behind the violence, the ghost, impossible to catch because it vanished at every try. But I found another character. Yes, a major drug lord, with wit, creativity, bold, but without the intelligence or temperament that was required to be the boss of bosses during the last century of the drug trafficking in Mexico. The book, Los Señor del Narco, was the result of 5 years of investigation, independent journalism without prejudice. Hundreds of murders accumulated year over year until there were thousands across the country, which was terrible. But I wanted to go further. I wanted to know what allowed that to happen. What was the story of that decomposition and who was responsible? When I investigated the history of Chapo, when I spoke with people who knew him, with members of other cartels, with people from the intelligence areas of the U.S. and Mexican governments, it seemed that he was an inflated character for the purpose of authorities to disguise the corruption behind his willingness to arrest the supposed fugitive number one. So it seems that Anabel's been on top of them for a long time as far as government. Even now in 2025, she doesn't mince words. And then she wasn't mincing words. She was saying exactly and asking the exact same questions that we ask right now on a regular basis on this channel. Who is allowing this stuff to happen, and why are they allowing it to happen? I never wanted to write a narco story, and I don't want to do it now. For in the middle of this journey, which many times involved going to hell, the intention was share the window through which I could look out, to know and document the complicity that existed for decades between public officials, politicians, businessmen, law enforcement, and drug cartels, and go beyond picturesque portraits that seem to speak only of isolated cases. Although the criticisms of Los Señor del Narco was going well, things were getting worse for me, becoming very complicated. The first previews of my book that were just published exasperated the spirits of the Secretary of Public Security, Genaro Garcia Luna, who is in prison right now for corruption, and his closest team, corrupt collaborators whom I mentioned as part of the public servants who were at the service of the Sinaloa cartel since the administration of Vicente Fox, former president of Mexico. Felipe Calderon was not happy either. I documented that his so-called war against drug trafficking, which began in 2006 after having become president with the stench of electoral fraud, it was a sham. She does not mince words, huh? All internal government documents to which I had access, the informants of the various cartels and official institutions they confirmed. This lady seems to have been on a mission to expose these politicians for a long time. She catches a lot of flack. I'm starting to think that's why. This book is, I don't know, a whole bunch of years old at this point. And she was on it then, and we just covered her speaking a couple of days ago. She's on it now. And those questions have yet to be answered. Ironically, Genaro Garcia Luna, that dog got his day. At the end of November 2010, a person who worked close to the boss's circle, the police, informed me that there was a plan to assassinate me. That warning was preceded by various attacks against my family, sources of information against me, and against my home. A few months ago, an American government official told me that they had confirmed that Garcia Luna and his people had made a plot to kill me. She made some enemies along the way, huh? In November 2017, a high-ranking police officer was handed over to the American justice system, Ivan Reyes Arzac, who served as intelligent liaison between the agency's Americans and the federal police during the 6-year terms of Calderón and Peña Nieto. He was part of Garcia Luna's team from the Federal Investigation Agency, then followed him to the Ministry of Public Secretary, where he reached the level of Director General of the Drug Division of the Federal Police. In November 2018, he was convicted in the Northern District Court of Illinois because he abused his position of trust and conspired with an international drug trafficking organization, High Level, for his own benefit. By doing so, he violated a duty to the Society of the United States, Mexico, and with the DEA agents for whom he worked. In the hearing in which his guilt was determined, he declared that in addition to himself, Genaro Garcia Luna and other commanders routinely received bribes from the Sinaloa cartel and the Beltran Leyvas, millions of dollars that were distributed among all. The fall of kings. Alzate was just the beginning. These are the payments, the millions and millions of dollars that they speak of, that over years and over different presidencies and over different administrations, these people paid out to government officials. The same people that at Mayo stood in front of a judge recently and said, "Your Honor, I've been paying bribes to politicians and police for 40 years. Same old questions, no answers. That was the context when that day in January 2011, they informed me that the lawyer, Fernando Giola, representative of a drug trafficker, wanted to contact me and meet with me. He had looked for me through a radio program where he had broadcast one of my interviews on Los Señor del Narco. The lawyer warned that the meeting could not be in Mexico because there I attracted a lot of attention, and he proposed that it take place in Chicago, in a low-key location. In Mexico, I lived with escorts, bodyguards, 24 hours a day, which made it very difficult to continue my work as a journalist. I did not love them, but I couldn't live without them either. These were particularly bad times. I won't mention their names, but I know from what we lived together that many of them really protected my life and that of my family, and I will be grateful to them forever. Under those circumstances, I had to reinvent myself, and part of the process was traveling to Chicago to keep that appointment. If with the plan to assassinate me, they wanted to close the door to continue with my investigation, I had to open a window. The beautiful city crossed by the Chicago River, once the domain of the gangster Italian-American Al Capone, became the site of a silent story that would forever change the course of the drug cartels in Mexico. And I was there, in front row, as a witness. My first meeting with lawyer Fernando Garciola was blind, in a restaurant near O'Hare International Airport on February 25, 2011. I did not know the lawyer, so I had no idea of his physical appearance. I waited for a few minutes in place without knowing if he was already there, if they were spying on me. When he came in, he recognized me. He had the appearance of an American, but his Spanish was impregnated with the Sinaloan accent. He was kind, smiling. I was struck by how he insistently put his hand to the side of his stomach under his jacket. He did it repeatedly, and it made me a little nervous. We started talking. He said he was a lawyer for Vicente Zambada Niebla, the son of Ismael Zambada Garcia, alias El Mayo, whom I had mentioned in Los Señor del Narco as the power behind the throne in the Sinaloa cartel. Vicentillo, as he calls him, has American government criminal accusations opened against him. He'd been arrested in Mexico City on March 18, 2009, when an arrest warrant was executed with extradition to the United States, where he was sent in February 2010. At that time, preparations were being made in the Illinois Northern District Court to start his trial. Giola told me that he was looking for me at the request of his client, who was confined in the Metropolitan Correctional Center of Chicago. According to him, Vicentillo heard a radio interview of mine. The attorney mentioned that he had an office in Tucson, Arizona, but that he was originally from Sinaloa, which matched the accent. I was trying to focus on what he was telling me, but I was really uneasy about the tick of putting his hand under the jacket while talking. For an instant, I thought the meeting was a trap. I just had a tumor removed, he said, when he sensed my concern and lifted his shirt to reveal a bandage. They had detected cancer, and I understood that it had been the first surgery. I too had a death threat against me, although of a different nature. He told an incredible story, and boy, had I heard a lot of extreme stories during the investigation of Los Señor del Narco. The lawyer told me that for years, at least since 1998, members of the leadership of the Sinaloa cartel such as El Mayo, El Chapo, Vicente, and others had direct contact with the DEA. He gave information that the agency used in operations coordinated with the government of Mexico, mainly the Navy, to arrest cartel leaders and lieutenants' enemies. In return, the DEA gave them protection. If that's not cooperation, I don't know what is. And that's cooperation pre being in trouble, pre going to prison, pre being indicted. That's just using it as a tool. I can't put my hands on you. I send somebody to put you in jail. We cool like that, but rather than put you in a ditch, we'll put you in prison. He gave information to the agency that they use in operations against his enemies. You always seen that one dirty cop in the movies, in all the movies. It's different when it's full-on precincts and whole areas. And you trading favors with alphabet boy organizations from the United States. Many of the arrests or killings of the most notorious ringleaders have been given in those circumstances. For example, Francisco Arellano Felix, a member of the cartel from Tijuana, arrested in 2006, or Arturo Beltran Leyva, leader of the Beltran Leyva cartel, killed in 2009 during a confrontation with the Navy, amongst many others. Giola had read my book with interest, whose main argument was complicity of the Sinaloa cartel with senior officials of the Mexican government and some institutions that for years have given them protection. This is a quote. "You're right, but things are even more serious, more complex. They go further," he told me. In my book, I had talked about the Iran-Contra case and how the American government, in order to have resources to finance the Nicaraguan Contra, which sought to overthrow the emerging left-wing government, had tolerated the CIA making deals within the late 70s and early 1980s with the Colombian cartels and the Mexican organizations, in particular the Medellin cartel led by Pablo Escobar Gaviria and the Guadalajara cartel led by Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. All right? We often speak about the Iran-Contra affair on this channel. Why? Because it's relevant still. Because violent people with a lot of power and money are helping other violent people play worldwide chess, and when you need something overthrown here or burnt down there, they get it done. The exchange consisted of allowing his drugs to come to the United States in exchange for a part of the profits that went to the Contras. Now, for those that don't know, the United States government, the president of the United States at the time, I can't remember who it was, denied funding for this war that was happening somewhere else between the Sandinistas and the Contras, and the U.S. stopped funding that war, so instead, these guys went, these alleged CIA agents, DEA agents, alphabet boys, whatever you want to call them, they flooded the streets with crack cocaine, and they used that money to pay for the weapons that the United States government stopped paying for, so that they could win a war that they needed to win. It was only in December 2010 that the scandal of Operation Fast and the Furious, conducted by the ATF, in which the American government allowed the sale of weapons to Mexico in an attempt to discover the arms trafficking networks. But with that, it caused more than 2,000 weapons to enter Mexico illegally and reach the hands of drug cartels, mainly the Sinaloa cartel. Operation Fast and Furious. all right, guys, this is how we're going to figure this out. We're going to take a bunch of guns, right? And we're going to sell them to guys that buy guns, right? And then we'll know everything after that. Right? We'll see what we know after that, and then we make our next move. What y'all think? Yeah. On February 15, 2011, they had just assassinated on a highway in San Luis Potosi a U.S. ICE agent, Jamie Zapata, with the weapon that had arrived in Mexico through the Fast and the Furious operation. The case was red hot. If what Giola told me was true, the story about the relationship of the government of the United States with the Sinaloa cartel, which according to the Americans themselves is a group of the world's largest drug traffickers, was a matter of public concern and therefore newsworthy. I wanted to know the case thoroughly. Giola revealed to me that the same night at the restaurant that Vicentillo had met with the DEA hours before his arrest in 2009, at the Maria Isabel Sheraton Hotel in Mexico City, located next to the United States Embassy. Ain't that right there? Zona Roja? No? Ain't that right there by where Panu got caught by himself in a Mexican restaurant, allegedly betrayed and casted out by Ivan? Sounds like the same place. The meeting was part of the agreements between the Sinaloa cartel and various agencies, American agencies. We say goodbye. He had to return to Mexico immediately. I told him if he had documentary evidence of settlements or court actions, I would post the story and I would follow the case to the end. I was not one of the journalists who sought the scandal of the day and then another scandal. I was a long-distance runner, not a sprinter. On March 4, 2011, was the presentation of Los Señor del Narco in a gallery that at the time occupied the restaurant Mi Tierra in the neighborhood of La Villita, the heart of the Mexican community in Chicago, alluding to the Villa de Guadalupe of the city from Mexico. Giola was present there, and in those days, the second of many other encounters we had for 5 years in a row. So her and Giola got close, huh? I remember the first hearing of Vicentillo's trial that I attended. It was the 30th of March, 2011, in room number 2141 of the tower located at 219 Dearborn Street in the downtown Chicago, where the seat of the Northern District Court of Illinois is located. There was not journalists. The room was semi-deserted. There were only some relatives of Vicentillo, the prosecution team, DEA agents, and other officers. There I saw Vicentillo for the first time with the orange overalls, the kind that prisoners wear, highly dangerous prisoners. By then he was 36 years old, but he looked very haggard. The uniform was too big for him and even made him look ridiculous. Maybe that's why in his self-portrait he was painted as a clown, dressed in a prison uniform, an orange cap, makeup on his face, and gleaming red nose, which is the illustration that occupies the cover of this book. When I saw that meticulous drawing by Vicentillo, I was shocked. The realism printed is a metaphor and a parody of the world in which he was born. Prince and slave. Prince and clown. Condemned. No way out. When he took his first breath in existence, his father was already the leader of the Sinaloa cartel. Beneath that pinkish color and white on his face, with the round ball-like nose and black lips, you could see the face of his father, and Mayo, from who he inherited the traits. There was some self-reflection going on to him drawing that cover, huh? Is that how he felt at the time? Like a clown? Did he feel like a failure? Did he feel like the pauper instead of the prince? You often see people that draw reflections of themselves. You see, whatever the inner monster is coming out through those visuals. It was definitely in his thoughts in prison. But what else you gonna do, right? Giola always showed concern that someone would find out about our encounters and see us in public in the United States. He preferred to meet us in the most discreet places possible, in the subway of Chicago or anonymous coffee shops. A time I tried to dissuade him from that idea, we were in a cafe located on the iconic Magnificent Mile, when some of the Mexicans who worked on the site asked me to take a picture. Do you see what happens, he said? Our meeting stopped being in Chicago, and we began to see each other in different parts of Mexico City. That was it. That's all he needed to know. All it takes is one person to say so-and-so was seen here with so-and-so, and it's over with. She said, let's do this in Tucson. Let's do this somewhere else. Or he said. The lawyer shared with me documents and facts about which I published some reports that in one way or another had an impact on Vicentillo's trial and in negotiations with the United States government. The son of Mayo wanted to assert in his defense the argument of public authority, pointing out that by means of the agreements between the DEA, the FBI, and ICE with the Sinaloa cartel, an implicit permission to traffic for which they could not judge him. Listen, I did this for you. You can't try me for that. I don't know how much that worked for him, though. The son of El Mayo wanted to assert in his defense the argument of public authority, pointing out that by means of the agreement between the DEA, the FBI, and ICE with the Sinaloa cartel, an implicit permission to traffic for which they could not judge him. Of course, the prosecution did not accept and would never accept that argument. Instead, they reached another agreement. Vicentillo became a collaborating witness. That is, he revealed information about members of the Sinaloa cartel that the United States government would use to initiate criminal proceedings and arrests. My first article on the subject was published in March 2011, Faster and More Furious. There I presented the briefs that the defense presented to the court, where it was stated that members of the Sinaloa cartel had reached agreements with authorities, American authorities, in which they would have immunity in exchange for giving information on enemy criminal organizations. This report was followed by many. Information. Oh, stop snitching. But if he's your enemy, you could tell on him. Picking and choosing, per usual. In the United States, if you watch the movies, if you watch The Wire, you can't be seen with the police. You can't talk to the police. You can't say good morning. You can't talk in court, that's for sure. Dry snitching is still snitching. You can't do nothing. The level that they hold you to, but they pick and choose. Because when they're bosses, the enemies can do what they want. Same thing with high-level gang members. You think these high-level gang members ain't hanging out with high-level gang members from other gangs that y'all are killing each other during the day, meanwhile they hanging out at night, getting money? That's been happening since time immemorial. The rules are only for you, man. However, most of the data and documents that Giola gave me provided in the encounters accumulated over the years. I did not publish them. It was very sensitive information that put Giola, his clients, and the process at risk. They were narratives by Vicentillo that corresponded to his diary, written by him and his lawyers during the negotiations to collaborate with the American government, in which it was reconstructing its history and the history of the Sinaloa cartel during the last 20 years, and that began since the Arellano Felix family tried to assassinate him for the first time. They were loose leaves, some handwritten in his own handwriting. Other papers were typewritten, translated into English, as part of Vicentillo's work with his defense attorneys. And there was a very extensive writing, 30 pages long, which is one of the first formal statements made on July 12, 2012. This statement is an accurate and true summary of the best that I remember. However, this summary contained in this statement represents only a small part of my knowledge of the topics contained here. AKA, I'm going to tell you a whole bunch, but there's more I could tell you. Just holler at your boy. This statement does not describe everything I know about the people and events I describe, and also I have additional information on other people and other events that are not described. This guy's volunteering and letting you know this statement is just a piece of the pie. There's plenty more I could tell you. Stop picking and choosing who's snitching and who's not. These guys don't go in there to tell no bullshit story that's going to get their deal thrown out the window. These guys go in there and they're ready to put everything down on the table. Why? Because if they find out that something on that table is out of pocket, they will lose that deal. Since I've been cooperating with the United States, the government has given me help to relocate certain members of my family from Mexico in the United States. We see that happening now with Ovidio. Ovidio cut his deal and had 17 members of his family brought over the border to the United States. I know my family would be in great danger of being killed if certain people I've spoken about today find out that I'm collaborating. As far as I know, no one I spoke about today knows where my family lives and that I am in protective custody. Through those writings of Vicentillo, the secrets of the Sinaloa cartel were revealed, and some from his father. It was not a story that only reached the epidermis, but as a scalpel entered, cut, and dissected every part of the anatomy of which it is considered the most important drug trafficking organization in the world, with presence in practically 70% of the planet. Vicentillo spoke of who they were in that moment, his father's most important partners or competitors, hitmen, lieutenants, how they moved drugs, how they bribed the entire government of Mexico. All of them. Everybody. He told everything. I hear nobody screaming about this guy and calling him names that I hear other people get called. Again, maybe it's the fact that he's not around. He's not on the internet. He's not telling his story. There are two very significant written sentences. 99% of the PGR are corrupt, PGR being the former prosecutor's office in Mexico. 99% of the PGR are corrupt. There's not even one of them that doesn't take money. As well as another sentence, who heard the father say, we work for the government. They bring us to the race working for them. Those phrases constantly resonate with me, especially when we see operations such as the arrest of Ovidio Guzman Lopez, son of Chapo, occurred in October 2019, who had American criminal charges. They already had him arrested and they let him go with the justification that their soldiers had surpassed the state. Through Vicentillo's writings, understand that this was not an accident or chance. Jesus. What she's speaking of is the Culiacanazo, when Ovidio Guzman was apprehended by police and then let go after hundreds of soldiers swarmed the streets of Culiacan with large, high-caliber weapons, and they tore shit down until the president said, enough. What did he say? He said, a narco-trafficker is not worth so many lives. It's not worth war. He didn't want war. According to this, and from what Anabel says about Vicentillo's writings, he'll help you understand that that wasn't an accident that he was let go. It was a massacre is what it was. At the same time, the stories of the son del Mayo reveal his intelligence, his sadness, and at times, biting irony, his longing to be free, his inner conflict of belonging to the cartel and at the same time repudiate it, to love his father and want to be close and at the same time give himself the realization that he's transformed into a criminal like him. Mayo decided to become a drug dealer, while Vicentillo was born when his father was already the king of drugs, more powerful than any other, above the legendary beloved Carillo Fuentes, the so-called Lord of the Skies. Damn, she's so-called Carillo Fuentes. Coño, man. Giola gave me a condition to share that information with me, and I respected it, how I respect my agreements with any other sources of information. Even more because I understood the magnitude of history for him and Vicentillo. He asked me not to post any of the documents written by Vicentillo on the operation of the cartel and its members, and all of the information he was releasing to the American government, until he was dead. The lawyer lived with the certainty that cancer would eventually defeat him. Well, she's saying that he said that. She's saying that he said, go ahead and release this when I'm gone. He could have said that. Did he leave proof that he said that? I don't know. It is what it is. The lawyer lived with the certainty that the cancer would eventually defeat him, while I still had a chance to save my own life. During the 5 years in which we had communication, Giola frequented El Mayo and El Chapo. He saw the latter until February 2014, when he was apprehended in Mazatlan. Much of the information he gave me came directly from conversations with them. He also gave it to Vicentillo, who in turn transmitted it to the government of the USA. So that conversation went from Chapo Mayo, or those conversations went from Chapo Mayo to the lawyer, from the lawyer to Vicentillo, to the United States government. It makes me think back to a time that Peter Flores said it was different for him talking when people like Vicentillo had permission. And they also said that there was lawyers that was helping them set up them deals. This is it right here. This is the lawyer setting up them deals. This guy had opportunity to talk, and not just talk, but to send out a worker and get that worker out there helping him with this information. In those years, when information was spread in the media about a supposed recapture of Chapo, he called the lawyer. All the times that he had said with certainty that El Chapo was still at large, he was never wrong. Unless he has the gift of ubiquity and was able to be with me and in another place at the same time. The attacks against me and my family forced me to leave Mexico in 2014. I went to the University of California at Berkeley, where I spent 2 years as a fellow in the investigative journalism program, where I began a research on 43 students from the rural school where Raul Isidro Burgos disappeared on September 26, 2014 in Iguala, Guerrero. My last meeting with Fernando Giola was on May 20th, 2015. I was absorbed just by the work on the disappearance of the Normalistas. The case had Giola very indignant because deep down he had the soul of an idealist of the left. He believed in justice and social struggle. I am also convinced that he believed in the power of truth. The truth at the service of others. He called me several times during that year. He asked me to come see him as soon as possible because he had little time left of life. He wanted to finish telling me. He wanted to finish giving me documents, writings. In that last meeting, we talked for several hours. I took notes. He asked me to publicize the story because he was convinced that this way people could understand what the Sinaloa cartel really is, what material it's made of, why it does what it can. So people could understand that many stories that governments tell, American government and Mexican government, are fallacies. His family had no knowledge of the content of our meetings. I complied. I've waited all this time. I sacrificed the immediacy of the news, hasty sensationalism due to the depth of the investigation and the passage of time to share this story that I hope will contribute to a much more understanding the great size of the Sinaloa cartel and the massive consequences it's had for Mexico and the world. I want to lead whoever reads this book by the hand to the world that I knew from the front row, quietly, alone, to draw your own conclusions from what the Sinaloa cartel represents, perhaps as a brutal symbol of the world that we live in. While I waited for the opportune time to publish the story, some of the criminals mentioned by Vicentillo in his notes were arrested. I was not an obstacle to the investigations being carried out. Others are still free. I've even waited for the trial against Joaquin Guzman Loera in New York. His lawyers contacted me, asked to meet with me because they knew that I had information about Vicentillo. I don't know how. Maybe El Chapo told them, because he participated in several of Giola's meetings with Mayo. The meeting did not take place. So at some point, all of these guys were talking to each other. The lawyer, Vicentillo, Mayo, Chapo, everybody was having conversations, negotiating each other's fates left and right. I also waited for Vicentillo to be sentenced on May 3rd, 2019. Instead of the life sentence prescribed in New York to his compadre Chapo, he was given 14 years, and most likely because of the time he had already been in prison, some from the benefits of good conduct and other considerations. At the end of November 2015, I received the news that Fernando Giola had passed away, and I went to his funeral. It was not just a source of information, but had become a friend. I mourned his death. I learned that the son of Mayo called for a phone to give condolences to the family. And because of the relationship that I understood that was created between them, I think that it was also a sensible loss for him. In May 2019, I met with criminal attorney Stephen G. Rawls at his Tucson office. He's the legal representative of Jesus Beltran, Vicente's co-defendant in the United States Court for the Northern District of Illinois, and was an attorney for Sandra Avila Beltran in her process in the United States, among other clients of that profile. Rawls was a friend and colleague of Fernando Giola for decades, so I wanted to talk with him to better understand Fernando's legacy. They studied law together in 1979 at the University of Arizona at Tucson. They became close friends. Their families lived together for many years, and his children also became friends. Rawls told me that Fernando was a man with socialist ideas. He defended many people in his office without resources who were at risk of deportation. He was primarily a civil attorney. Fernando was an intelligent person. He spoke very clearly. He did not say a thing, and then he changed his mind. He was very direct in the way he spoke. I talked a lot, but whenever he spoke the truth. Supported groups of Chicanos for vocation, helped people most in need. Fernando liked to help people. That was his character. Never to my knowledge has he been singled out for any wrongdoing. He was a very upright person. He was never accused of malpractice. Rawls told me that the last time he saw him was in Superior Court. I've had a good life. I had no reason to think it wasn't a good life, but I don't have much time left. There's no remedy for me, Giola would have told him. Fernando's work as a lawyer was key in the defense of Vicentillo and in the agreement they reached with the prosecution. They spent many hours working on it. That is what Rawls told me. I don't know what others will say about Fernando Giola. I know that I met a man who took the risk of sharing this story with me that in no other way I could have known. And that was his wish, that it be done publicly, because society has the right to know. The story I present in the following pages is a story told by myself, Vicente Zambada Niebla, through his writings. His voice is mostly literal. I just made some corrections to its syntax and narrative order to adjust the sequence on a timeline. As a parenthesis, I found it interesting twice Vicentillo's speech regarding Chapo. In his writings, he always referred to him in a cold, distant, and impersonal way. He only called him Chapo. whereas in his testimony given at the trial, in the eyes of Guzman Loera, always referred to him as my friend Chapo. He was his friend at the trial, my friend Chapo, but everywhere else he was just Chapo. The story of the junior capo is enriched with the testimony that Giola gave me in our conversations. He spoke directly with Vicentillo and El Mayo for 5 years. It is their voices that mainly drive the narration. And on a third plane, there's my voice, with the purpose of giving context to what they indicated, and to add the result of the research that I did in parallel during the last years for the purpose of confirming or expanding the information. The gaps that existed in the story narrated by Vicentillo and the writings that were delivered by the lawyer, I could fill them out with his own statements in the trial that took place against El Chapo in the Eastern District of New York since November 2018. The testimonies in the same trial of Jesus Zambada Garcia, Alex Cifuentes, Tirso Martinez Sanchez, Damaso Lopez Núñez, among others. I obtained the official stenographic version of the hearings. A good part of the documentation I describe here can be found in the annex at the end of the book. Through these voices, the face and profile of the true drug boss in Mexico in the last half century, the true king of drug trafficking that has never set foot in the jail, the 70-year-old man who from his throne has seen friends, enemies, suppliers, partners, competitors, family members, government employees, and even their own children, without this having made any dent in their power, Ismael Zambada Garcia and Mayo, who we know now is in custody of the American government in a prison because the sons of El Chapo, primarily Joaquin, betrayed him, kidnapped him, put him on an airplane, and brought him as a bargaining chip to the United States of America. This book is the result of a 9-year journey into the labyrinths and secrets of El Mayo and the Sinaloa cartel. The story that I narrate here is totally my responsibility, mine. It is up to the reader to discover who the traitor is. Chapter 1. I am the son of Mayo Zambada. My dad is Ismael Zambada Garcia. El Mayo is his nickname, but they also call him the Godfather, the Doctor, the Lady, and the Closer. And the closer people, like my compadre Chapo, call it the Kitchen. It was a code used on the phone to refer to my father. My father is the leader of the Sinaloa cartel. The goal of the cartel, as in any other business, in this case, trafficking drugs, is to make money. And with money, one gains power and capacity to corrupt. The drugs that the cartel sells to make money are mainly cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana. The Sinaloa cartel has existed in one way or another since the 1970s. My father is one of the early leaders of the cartel. He was a compadre and partner of Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, and the brothers Arellano Felix. In the first decade of 2000, along with my father, the other leaders of the cartel were Chapo, Juan José Esparagosa Moreno, whom I know as El Azul, Arturo Beltrán Leiva, and Ignacio Coronel, who I knew as Nacho. The cartel functions as an affiliation of these individuals and their organizations. That's what it looks like when a boss's son talks. And he's going to give you everything in depth. Let's start from one. Meanwhile, people picking and choosing. Always remember, the rules are only for you. The rules are not for the guys at the top. For power, for money, for corruption, unfortunately, there are the jealousies of other people, people who are envious of you, that start problems, and this is how wars start. Vicente Zambada Niebla is known to the United States government as Vicentillo, although according to himself, they also call him El Niño, El Diez, El Diego, or La Waitress, because of his father being the kitchen. Some kind of dark humor from Narcos. There's a whole lot of it. A whole lot of it. They call each other girl names, all kind of stuff. He's the first male child of El Mayo, born March 23, 1975. According to credentials of the elector issued in Culiacan, Sinaloa, when he turned 18, of which I have a copy as part of the documents that lawyer Fernando Giola gave me, he's the only male of the children procreated in the marriage of Mayo and Rosario Niebla Cardosa. Her sisters are Maria Teresa, Miriam, and Monica. Chaito, as El Mayo affectionately calls Rosario, is an original woman of El Dorado, a receivership from Culiacan, Sinaloa. The boss fell in love with her at first sight when he was 13 years old, and although they're no longer formally married, Chaito continues being the queen of his heart, although she's the queen among many other women. As Mayo himself told Giola, he has more than 10 children, but of all, Vicentillo is the most loved, the favorite. That's it, huh? Out of all 10, I'm going to pick, and y'all are going to know it. For the rest of your life, you're going to know who my favorite was, and you're going to have to think about why you weren't. Damn. The story that links them goes much further than a relationship between father and son. It's a story of tragedy, pain, crime, death, revenge, and betrayal. Meetings and farewells. The phrase blood calls between the two are much more than just words. If you compare the photograph taken in May for the processing of his passport when he was about 50 years old with a recent photograph of Vicentillo, you can see that they are really alike. Tall, erect, the same light brown skin tone, hair abundant and very black, the same straight and slightly turned nose. The most similar physically between father and son are the downward slanting eyes, dark, fierce, intelligent, like two drops that fall under the eyebrows. When Vicentillo was born, his father was already the king of a criminal empire until now very little explored. But like every prince, he was born a slave. His social circle was national and international drug traffickers, hitmen, money launderers, politicians, and corrupt officials. Before all, his father always had the last word. No one was above him. He never had another type of reference. That is the world he saw, and it's the one that he lived in from his first blink. Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo called himself the chief of chiefs, but he never did. It was El Mayo. Originally from Sinaloa, like El Mayo, he was a member of the judicial police and escort of Leopoldo Sánchez Celis during the time he was governor of Sinaloa. So this governor cartel connection, this politician cartel connection, it is so deep in Mexico. It's embedded in the DNA, and it's trained through generations upon generations to hide itself as much as possible and deny its own existence. At the end of the 70s, he was already the leader of the so-called Guadalajara cartel. Together with Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, Don Neto, and Rafael Caro Quintero, the Prince, established business with powerful organizations like Pablo Escobar Gaviria. The criminal emporium went bankrupt when DEA agent Enrique Camarena in 1985 was assassinated in complicity with the CIA. Coño, man. They were all arrested, giving room to other visible empires, while there was one that pulled all the strings from behind. El Mayo and Felix Gallardo did business together, but the first already had his own independent empire. Amado Carrillo Fuentes was from Navolato, Sinaloa, Fonseca's nephew. He worked for another policeman, Rafael Aguilar Guajaldo, in Ojinaga, Chihuahua. Aguilar Guajaldo had control of Ciudad Juarez and Nuevo Laredo. After the death of Aguilar, who was murdered in 1993 on a Cancun dock, Amado appropriated his territory and earned the nickname of the Lord of the Skies for the air fleet that he used to traffic cocaine from Colombia to the United States. The Juarez cartel was a business that he managed with his brothers Vicente, better known as Viceroy, and Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes, called El Niño de Oro. Nobody knows until now, but El Mayo was godfather to Amado and his brother Vicente. Hence, they gave him the nickname the Godfather. And the Lord of the Skies, who was thought to be the Almighty, but in actuality, he was the subordinate. Joaquín Guzmán lo era. El Chapo is originally from La Tuna in Badiraguato, Sinaloa. When Mayo was already a boss, he was a minor employee of Felix Gallardo and after Amado Carrillo. In 1993, his name rose to world fame because the government, Carlos Salinas de Gortari, falsely held him responsible for having been involved in the crossfire where Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo was assassinated in the Guadalajara International Airport together with the Arellano Felix brothers. Now that's the story in which Chapo is still to this day in prison saying the government did that. The government did that. The government went there and they hit the wrong person. They thought they were getting me and they hit the wrong person. I didn't do that. They've been blaming him for that. They've been blaming Chapo for that since then, and he's been denying it. Amado, for whom El Chapo had become a problem because he was violent and liked to attract attention, betrayed him and gave the government his whereabouts to continue with his criminal business smoothly. The downside is that he enjoyed it little. In 1997, he died on the plate of a hospital in Mexico City when he tried to undergo liposuction and facial surgery to transform his obese figure. Really. So there you go, betrayal. They're all in the same business, right? They're all hustling together, but I don't like you. You violent. I'm gonna get you out of here. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna give the government your whereabouts. Handle that. The Beltran Leyva brothers, originally from the community of La Palma, also in Badiraguato, are cousins of Chapo. There are 9 in total. So look at that. They're cousins. They went to war. That was the real fall of the Sinaloa cartel. There are 9 in total, 5 men and 3 women. They worked for Mayo for a long time. The 3 best known men, Arturo, Alfredo, and Hector, were inseparable, and the loyalty between them unwavering, to the death. They were called the 3 Knights. Arturo was the one who helped El Chapo become independent from his cruel father, who beat him and exploited, taking him to the sowing and harvesting of drugs and then squandering the money on alcohol and prostitutes. It was the Beltran Leyvas who helped El Chapo in his first planting marijuana when he was just 13 or 14 years old. It was Arturo who, thanks to the work that El Mayo gave him, provided Chapo with the resources to bribe the officials and guards of the maximum security prison of Puente Grande, Jalisco, where he was imprisoned in 1993, and from where he escaped with the help of El Mayo himself and Arturo in 2001. For their part, the Arellano Felix brothers were part of another criminal clan made up of initially at least 8 siblings: Enedina, Eduardo, Benjamin, Ramon, Francisco, Rafael, Francisco Javier, and Carlos Alberto, and Norma Isabel. Most have faced formal charges for drug trafficking. They were important partners of El Mayo when he controlled drug trafficking to the United States at the border of Tijuana, and their families lived together as one. Juan Jose Esparagosa Moreno, El Azul, was from Juciopa, Badiraguato. In the 1970s, he was also an agent of the judicial police and became friends with Felix Gallardo, Caro Quintero, and Fonseca Carrillo, with whom he began a discreet career criminal who, after all of them ended up in prison, continued with Amado Carrillo as a negotiator for drug transactions in Mexico and Colombia. He was the glue, the connection between Felix Gallardo and El Mayo. Whenever there was a conflict between criminal groups, he was summoned to act as a mediator before someone pulled the trigger first. Ignacio Coronel is originally from Canelas, Durango. Some claim that he's the uncle of Emma Coronel, wife of El Chapo, but she categorically denied it in an interview that she did in February 2016. Nacho, as his friends called him, fully entered drug trafficking in the shadow of Amado Carrillo in the late 80s, when he worked at the side of Hector El Güero Palma and El Chapo. In June 1993, a few days after the assassination of Cardinal Posadas Ocampo, his older brother, Raimundo Coronel Villarreal, also a drug trafficker, was killed by intelligence elements of the 5th Military Region. Ignacio Coronel became important because he was one of the visionaries who discovered the methamphetamines were the drugs of the future and established laboratories clandestine in Jalisco. All of these leaders, their families and employees lived together daily in meetings, working, and parties. Clans made relationships to create alliances. The most common way was to baptize or confirm a child or marry children of different families, thereby trying to guarantee peaceful working relationships. So let's mix it all up, man. I'm going to marry your daughter, you marry my sister, he marry your cousin, everybody got peace, until it turns into what we're seeing today in a war where nobody's family members are safe. All of them are in danger. Everybody is in hiding. Since he was a child, Vicentillo knew that his father was the boss, not only in his family. I saw him dictate orders to his partners, reward or punish those who worked for him. But he was slow to knowing what his father's business was that made him so powerful. Attorney Giola confided how he discovered that his father's job was different from that of other people's parents. One day, when I was on the cattle ranch, I saw that my father was counting wads of money with a friend. There was a desk full of money with the machine to count it. It was then when I opened my eyes and thought, what business is my father in? In the late 1980s, El Mayo, his wife Chayito, and their 4 children established in Tijuana. The Arellano Felix are originally from Cancun, but when they were very young, they moved to Tijuana, Baja California, and are known as the Arellano Felix of the Tijuana Cartel. At that time, most of them were partners and compadres of my dad. I saw them very often when I lived there in the 80s. Javier Arellano Felix, Francisco Arellano Felix, Ramon Arellano Felix, Edward Arellano Felix, was with whom he had the most contact. I met my compadre Chapo in the late 80s, early 90s, in one of my father's houses. He went to visit my dad there. I was between 15 and 16 years old. Other security people were present who worked for them. My dad introduced me to Chapo. He just said my compa Chapo. El Chapo is the godfather by baptism of my youngest son. In 1988, Ramon Arellano Felix killed a compadre of my compadre Chapo at my dad's birthday party. His name was Armando Lopez, a.k.a. Rayo Lopez. That Ramon Arellano was just fly off the handle shit, huh? We at the party and I'm just going to smoke your homeboy right now, which is a family member, which is a homeboy, which is a line of money, it's just not good for everybody to be, quick to the hammer out there. They wildin'. After the murder, there were several meetings in Mexico. I was not present, but my father and Amado Carrillo Fuentes were there. They went to Mexico City to have a meeting. My dad, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, my compadre Chapo, Hector Salazar Palma, alias El Güero Palma, and the Arellanos to see what had happened. At that time, they had been seeking to make amends. Everything had been fine between the Arellanos and my compadre Chapo, who in that time was living in Guadalajara a few times a year. They said that everything had been fine with Ramon Arellano. In 1991, I was studying in the city of Tijuana. I was in the first grade of high school. I was 15 years old. When one day leaving my house, I was going to pick up my girlfriend, Zintia Borboa Zazueta, who is now my wife. She lived in Los Angeles. When I got in my car and left my house, about 6 blocks away, a van closed in on me. A person jumped out and wanted me to open the door. He yelled for me to get out. I locked the door and sped up the car, and when I started, I heard a bullet in the glass of my car. I saw that it broke or splintered because the car I was riding in was armored. 15 days ago, my dad sent me the car and told me not to go out on the street if I wasn't in that car. That was the first attack on me. I don't know if it was a kidnapping attempt or actually they wanted to kill me. At 16, Vicentillo, the eldest son of Mayo, was going to be assassinated by the Arellano Felix. Casielo points out that the clan had killed 2 of Mayo's associates days before, one in Culiacan and another in Tijuana. They blamed him for the murders to create problems with his allies. That's why it's hard to believe anything that's said out there, and it's hard to believe people when they tell me, no, but this person did that, and this person did that. There was a constant trend of people doing things and pointing at somebody else, man. Take everything with a punch of salt. The situation put Mayo on alert. He had already bought his son a brand new Mustang convertible to go through California and Tijuana, but at the last minute, he sent the armored vehicle and ordered him not to go anywhere without it. Vicentillo blindly obeyed his father, and on that occasion, it saved his life. Giola claimed that he was shot directly at the head and was saved thanks to the armor. As soon as El Mayo learned of the attack on his son, he instinctively called Ramon Arellano to ask for an explanation. Ramon, of course, denied any interference in the facts, said that he did not know about the attack and that he had nothing to do with it. While they were shooting at him, Vicentillo heard that one of the hitmen received a radio communication in which they informed him he was the first target. How'd you hear all that in a bulletproof car? Quote, Dad, they're lying to you. I heard Ramon's voice, Vicentillo said. And Mayo decided to move Chaito and his children to Culiacan where he felt more insurance. While he withdrew, the Arellano Felix took control of Tijuana, which until that moment was divided with Zambada Garcia. Another split. Eso pasa. Then a few months later, I, my mother, and my sisters will return to live in Culiacan, Sinaloa. In Culiacan, I got to continue high school, and I lived in the house of my older sister, Maria Teresa, with my brother-in-law, Javier Diaz, my sister's husband. One night, while I was at my sister's house, someone knocked on the door. I was already prepared with the gun. I had it wrapped around my waist because at the time, my dad and the Arellano Felix went wrong. They were enemies, and a very ugly war had started. So when I opened the door, I feel like they hit me in the face, a punch. And 2 people tried to get in my house. The teenager reacted quickly and managed to close the door, but the hand of one of his aggressors remained with the weapon drawn between the door. They shot him. They were people from the Arellano Felix. There it is, the foreword and the first chapter. I am the son of El Mayo Zambada. We had to get through the formalities of the foreword and get the information on how this book came to be and how it stemmed from. She did another book and the attorney Giola reached out to her, We had to get into their relationship. We had to get into how Giola and Vicente are connected, and how Giola was an important linchpin in the deals that were being made at the time, and the permissions and the information traveling between the United States prison system and Mexico, federal prison system at that, and Mexico, through this lawyer, and how they brought Anabel into the fray, and she was blessed with information that she says he said to release in the event of his demise. We also got to see how far Vicente was willing to go, as far as, listen, this statement that I'm giving you is just a small piece of the pie. I have more. There's more where that came from. Much like his father, an encyclopedia of knowledge, insight, and the understanding of secret dealings behind the scenes between the government and the cartels. And then we got to chapter 1, where he starts breaking down his childhood, how he didn't know why his father was powerful, how he didn't know how his father was getting his money. But he did see betrayal. He did see splintering of factions. He did see war that came knocking on his door. Luckily, he was in an armored truck when it came a knocking. And now we have yet another occasion where somebody's trying to invade his house with guns. That's the end of chapter 1. Make sure you join me for chapter 2 and 3 next time, right here on El Cartel, The Traitor by Anabel Hernández, read by your boy, Shail. Peace.